Okay. Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Be More podcast. I'm Brittany.
I'm Maria, and I almost forgot how we started these because we've been on a hiatus for like what, 2, 3 weeks. We have guests today.
Yay.
Dan, welcome back. Michelle, welcome, and also very nice to meet you.
Yes, you guys too.
Brittany, do you want to say why they're back, or do you want them to introduce themselves again, or?
Well, no, I mean, Dan, we got to talk to Dan. Oh, this is going to be confusing because my Dan and not, this is people who don't watch this. This is Dan who came on previously, not my Dan.
Distinctions have to be made right now.
This is our friend. This is our friend Dan and his wife Michelle. And I think one of the biggest reasons, correct me if I'm wrong, Dan, why we wanted to bring Michelle onto the show is because she's a big part of your story, right? And like going forward and now, and was there for a lot of the stuff that you were experiencing and what you were sharing in our last time talking to you. But we were also kind of talking a little bit about the fact that like Michelle is going through her own like journey too, right? Which is like the beautiful thing about being in a relationship is that you guys get to do it separately, but also do it together. And that's really why we wanted to bring you guys on. We wanted to like, we can cover so many things in this, right? Like Michelle, we'd love to hear like your side of everything and what you saw going on with Dan and the tradition, like the transition, and what your journey's been like and your stuff being together through all of it too. I think that's really important for people to be able to hear the reality of what really makes a relationship versus all
Right.
the relationship goals things that we like kind of put out there and like stereotype. So I think that was where my thinking was at. But if there's anything I didn't say or anything you want to cover, that'd be awesome too.
Feel free. Okay.
Be honest.
Be honest.
Yeah, be as open as. I mean, he gave you permission, so then it's really like a
Twice now.
Yeah, twice now.
Twice.
Well, I mean, we've been together for 8 years now.
Mhm.
And we recently moved to North Carolina, and I recently got a job as a surgical technologist, which is somebody who just works in the OR. Yes. It's
Congratulations.
Thank you. That's a whole new journey in itself too, because that's what I got certified for when I was like 18, 19 years old. And just, getting a job in that field was a little hard, being that I didn't have the experience, but I got recertified and now I get to start that again.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I mean, as far as what I do kind of on the side, I'm a health and wellness coach. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Beachbody. I kind of work through them. And the reason I signed up with them, it helped me get back into fitness. I didn't like going to the gym or anything. And I like doing home workouts. So they had like a whole array of workouts I could do from home. And I got to reconnect with one of my high school friends from North Carolina. And from there, I kind of found my passion in nutrition. And it kind of went along too with Daniel's journey. When he, was diagnosed with bipolar and PTSD, and we moved in with some roommates. That's when I kind of started getting into the whole nutrition thing because he didn't like being on as many medications as he was on. And I totally get it because, he one day woke up, he was like, I feel like an 80-year-old at 20 something years old because he had, a bedside full of pills. And I totally, understood that, but at the same time didn't because I am not somebody who takes medication like that. But then I started doing research and we switched over from eating everything to fish and veggies. We went pescatarian for 6 months. And in that process, yeah, that was that was something. That I was new to cooking too, so he's a trooper for trying the recipes that we were trying. But after a couple months, I want to say we went back to his psychiatrist and we kind of told her we weaned him off of some of the medication. So he ended up only being on one, which he has to because chemical imbalance, he has to take that one. But as far as antidepressant or anxiety, the antidepressant was completely gone and the anti-anxiety one is just as needed, which, was very rare. So yeah, and then from there, I kind of found my passion in my career to want to do nutrition or dietitian. But when I moved to North Carolina, I found out I had to be a registered dietitian and nutritionist. So it kind of works out in my favor. And then when I did a little bit more research in it, I want to do intuitive eating. I looked into diet culture, and diet culture is a billion-dollar industry that has ruined, body image. People being scared to eat vital foods like carbs and fats, which I mean, I was somebody who went through that as well. When Daniel was going through his journey, I mean, I was going through my own, but I had to be there for him. So once, I would say once you got into work and everything and you kind of had your flow, I got onto mine, and I was always somebody who was underweight. And I kind of fell into the belief that what people were telling me, like, be grateful for being skinny, like, be grateful for the body you have and all of that. So, and I don't know, I was almost scared. I come from a family, I'm first generation American. We're Polish, so we grew up on bread and potatoes and all of that. And I mean, some of my family is a little bit, on the plus side, like bigger. So I guess my mom and aunt and everybody was very like self-image. They never wanted to get bigger, anything. So it put fear on me too. So I didn't eat certain foods. I was scared to eat more than the regular person. So I was severely underweight, which gave me anxiety, no sleep schedule. I ran on coffee. I mean, this may be TMI, but like my cycle was irregular completely. For a girl, that's like,
Oh, it's bad.
Don't you worry.
Yeah.
We'll talk about all.
Oh yeah.
no, that was not fun. I mean, he's heard it all.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
and it sucked too, because it's like when you get into relationships with people, like they tell you when you're going through therapy not to build relationships out of people that are in your group and stuff like that, because you become codependent. And even though Michelle wasn't dealing with mental illness like I was, what she just described as the lifestyle was not eating, not sleeping, living off coffee or caffeine stimulants and all that kind of stuff. So for it's a hard line to kind of go along, because it could very well, even without dealing with the kind of stuff that I have to, fall in line with someone else doing something similar like that. So,
Yeah. And I mean, when was it? I think it was 2 years ago too, after being, from teenage years to my mid 20s, I was telling doctors, as far as like my cycle was irregular, heavy, I skipped the first day, always, like from school, from work, everything. And then finally one doctor was nice enough to run some tests and everything, and that I figured out I had PCOS, which is polycystic ovarian syndrome. So that explained a lot of symptoms.
That in itself, the diagnosis explains a lot, because
Yes.
it's actually very common. It runs in my family too. I also have very irregular cycles, and so do my sisters. So I feel you, because then that regulates your body weight, your mood, your depression, anxiety. So
Yeah, and that's what I found too, is like I had hormonal depression, like really bad. And I mean, he started noticing it, and at first I thought I need to, go talk to somebody, this, that, and the other. But once I got that diagnosis, I kind of gave myself grace, like, this is just hormones. I can't, I got to do my best to kind of get through it. And I found my ways. Just getting outside, body movement helps
a lot.
a lot. A lot.
Mhm.
But yeah, after that, I mean, I kind of kicked us in the butt and was like, we got to get things right. So I went from 109 pounds, which was awful. I looked awful as far as like really skinny. So now I'm 135 pounds, which is
congratulations.
I've never seen that number before.
Congratulations. That's a good improvement.
and I went from 145, which is what I weighed like sophomore year of high school, to like 170. So
Yeah,
I was able to
Dan,
put on.
like you were so skinny in high school. I can't even imagine what.
I've seen pictures. I was like, what?
And like I just attribute that because you ran track, and I was like, oh, maybe he
Right,
just
and
has
that
to.
literally, that was also what he attributed it to, too. Like, that was his. I remember he'd be like, oh yeah, I'm tiny because I run, and like I need to be tiny because I need to be able to run. Like, and then we were like, oh, you're all muscle. Like, we get it. It all makes sense. But
Yeah.
there's always a
Lie.
lot. There's always a lot.
And then he came back from deployment. No, and then he came back from deployment. He was 185 pounds.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Wow.
Gotcha.
Crazy.
So
That's
I lost
crazy.
40 pounds in the matter of a couple of years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not healthy.
Jeez.
Yeah.
That's a very small person. That's a tiny person.
That is a very
That's
small.
insane. But that's
Yeah.
like, so Michelle, you had a very, you had your, for, lack of a better way to talk about it, like coming of age in terms of like learning about yourself and building that awareness like on your own. So
Yes.
and like you guys, it's up to you how comfortable you feel going into this. And I think I'm curious about this because my dad and I have a very similar situation. Like, we were young when we got together, and we've been together for a decade. So we had to go through our stuff too, but it's not very gentle on our relationship, right? Because you both bring all of that stuff into your relationship, and sometimes, not at the beginning, you might not really even be aware that you have it and you're carrying it around. And then, like Dan said, right, like that instability loves instability, right? If you're unstable in any way, shape, or form, right? When you see it in somebody else, it almost kind of gives you this like, oh, that's fine, or like, let me start to like lean into this instability a little bit too. What did you guys notice? Like, were there things that you saw in your relationship that became difficult, and like, how did you overcome them?
So I actually found out when I was going through all the things, like even before I started going through therapy, and one of the reasons that kind of geared me going that route is PTSD is actually transferable. Not necessarily the memories that, cause the person to have PTSD, but like if someone, let's say they were abused as a child, it's not always the case that someone would abuse their child as well, but though they can impose those, I guess, feelings onto them, talking about the situations that caused it and kind of making the other person live through that can cause symptoms of PTSD in the other person. So it's very interesting because I noticed myself being, it almost like was I was a sociopath in a sense. Like I was very controlling of other people when I was in the army. Kind of came into the relationship like that too, and um, it was very difficult, I guess, to get past that and realize that for myself. And that's really what it was a lot of it, like Michelle could only do so much for me. And had I not done it for myself, that, it's, but you can.
Yeah, no, I mean, it was really communication. Like there was just breaks in communication. It would be, I would know everything, and then there would be a push away, and then all of a sudden, like everything came out all at once, and it wasn't nice. It was very messy for sure for periods of time. But I think, I mean, you were scared to, I shouldn't say scared, that's like the wrong word, but going to go get help, I mean, it's scary in itself. You don't know where it's going to lead you. You don't know what relationships may end, what, may begin, so on and so forth. So for a year, it was just very tug and pull with all of that. And I think that's where I was just like, our communication has always been good. Like, we don't like yelling at I don't like yelling. So we try to keep that at a minimum. And it just came down to like, I'm not a doctor. Like, I am here for you, and I will always be here I will support you through anything. But like, I can't help you more than what I'm already doing. So, you need a professional. And like from there, I think we grew because he started, learning about, cognitive behavioral skills and learning how to talk through things rather than getting so hyped up or getting so down that he just shuts down. That we found a balance in communication, I think.
And like traveling through it, both of you brought up really good points that I want to like resurface on. And Maria, feel free to like knock me over at any point. Even when we can't like really share experiences with people, right? We will never know what an experience is like when someone else describes it to us, unless we're there through it, right? And we're going through it. But those feelings we share, right? That's like that famous quote, like, people won't remember what you say to them, but they'll always remember how you make them feel. And so much of the time, we don't realize the power that we have in evoking other people's feelings just by like through our own feelings. And then you brought up a good point too, right? And that's the scary part about having to address stuff, is that you have to face those feelings all over again. And I know that I come from a family of avoiders, just as a coping mechanism. Like, that was how we were I have no idea how far back it goes, but I know that it exists. And I am very much the opposite in that. But I know that for people that don't want to face things, that's the biggest fear, right? I was having a conversation with my brother about all the stuff that's going on with my father right now. And, we were kind of talking about having to face things and communication, like keyword. That was what Dan and I brought up in our conversation in our last episode too. My dad and I, when we were talking about relationships, we were talking about communication is a huge factor. And it's really interesting because I was kind of talking to my brother about how, like, I was going to therapy because I felt like I needed to talk about stuff because that's the kind of person that I am. I want to get through stuff, and I talk about it to get through it. And he was like, no, that sounds terrible. Why would I ever want to, like, do that and face that stuff? Not as, like, not to make fun of me, but, like, his literal response was, like, that sounds terrifying. And I know my Dan feels very much the same way. So, like, when we get to those points, I'm like, okay, well, I need to, like, let this out. And, like, he wants to hold it in and wants to kind of just be like, no, I'm going to fold it up. I'm going to put it in a little bag. I'm going to stick it over here. And then I'll come back to it when I can. And it usually ends up pouring out all over the floor, right? And then I'm very overwhelmed and confused because I don't know how it got there or what's in there. And he's like, oh, crap, it all spilled out. Now I got to clean it up.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, that's a very... I don't know if it's a lot of the times, I don't know, do you guys feel like it's a gender-based thing? Like a gender influenced on your identity, like how you associate, the way we were raised? Do you guys have any thoughts on that?
I think raised. I would say raised.
I would say raised, and I don't know, like, from a veteran standpoint, I guess, like, my personal view on it is that it's like, yeah, what you went through is expected. Of course you're like this. This is what you should expect to be like. Like, that was a big, like, just swallow it. You can go talk to someone if you want to, but when you're in an environment where everyone else feels the same exact way, like, because Michelle knew all of my friends that I have in the Army. She was there. She came.
Yeah, but I didn't know your culture. Being that I'm first generation American in my family, like in Poland, I don't want to say we don't have it, like we have people that served in the military there, but it's not the same view that we have here. Like, it's very, like, patriotic and all of, like, the
war culture.
The war culture. We don't have that there. We don't even know what really terrorism is or anything like that. They don't, like, my parents didn't grow up with that. They obviously grew up after the war and everything. So it was definitely new too when it came to, knowing Daniel and knowing his friends and knowing his life, especially when he was in the military. And I think that also scared me because I'm like, I don't know how he's going to I'm a person that, like, I have to watch my filter and watch my temper because I'll say anything. And
same.
I know I can hurt a person with what I say. So I have to think about it for a second. And I think that's, especially when you were going through, your stuff, it's almost like walking on eggshells. That's how I felt. And I almost knew that was hurting our relationship as far as communicating with each other because we shouldn't hide anything from each other. If that's how we feel, if that's what we want to say, then we say it and we explain it.
Yeah, I think that's the harder part is, honestly, I think it's the culture aspect of it all because culture kind of sums it up in a sense. Like, military culture, unless you go on base and you're with people and they're explaining it and, like, you're in that environment, it's very hard already for us to relate because of the experiences we have. But then it's an entirely different culture within the culture of America. It's like, yeah, people are patriotic, but it's different for the people that you're calling that are to be patriotic about. I guess is the sense, like, how people always thank people for their service, but they don't really know what the service entails.
Yeah.
Like,
what's funny, it's even, I remember when I first, like, reconnected with, because we've known each other since when I was 5, because me and Robin were good friends. When he came back from his deployment, I remember everyone saying that day, because everyone knew Dad was coming, but everyone was scared to go up to him, and I didn't understand that. I'm like, well, why are you scared of? Well, he's a soldier. I'm like,
and
I wasn't used to that. Like, I don't.
Can I interject for a second? Sorry.
Yeah.
Because I'm also first generation American, my parents are from the Philippines, so I also do not understand that culture. Like
Yeah.
100%, I'm just like, I don't like, yes, they're soldiers, but also yes, they're also human, and also yes, that's their job. Like it's the same thing if I was
Yes.
like, I'm an accountant. Okay, great. Like, like it's great that what they do, but also like there's a pedestal that we put them on,
Hmm.
which we shouldn't. And sometimes we should, but sometimes we shouldn't, because like they're also like the people that we saw before they went to deployment. It's
But
like the same.
imagine that's the difficult part, right? Is that you can honor and respect somebody, but the second you put them on a pedestal, you isolate them,
Yes.
right? So
Right.
that's the big part of the culture, right? And what I was thinking about the second you guys started talking about this is how when you used to throw, like, Dan used to have these like parties at his house,
Yep.
and when and then I'll just give you like my experience on them. So we were very close in high school, and then you went off to like do this big thing, and I was like, I was one of those, I wasn't afraid of him, but I just felt like there was such a space there, and I was never gonna be able to step into his space now, because
Mhm.
I couldn't. What was I possibly gonna do right in
Right.
that space? And it was I don't know if it was a I saw, I think everybody else put you there, and then I saw the relation, which is why I tried to like befriend the people that you like, oh, like the people that were with you, right? Like all the friends that you brought back with you. But I never knew like how do I get myself? I can't do that. Like I'm not there. I'm not gonna like relate to those experiences. So it was kind of like this. How do I approach that? So I would love, aside from that issue, right? Because that was my hardest thing. I disliked the fact that like it felt like a huge separation, right? And like didn't know what would be the right thing to do, right? And like worrying about what the right thing to do would be. What would you say? Like how do we approach that? Because then at the end of the day, like, right, my doing that was still isolating you just because I was so afraid of not doing the right thing, or like making you feel, I don't know what I was afraid of, but I know that there was fear there. So like how do we approach, what would you say, like when you, I know that you have a lot of feelings about the way that people treated you when you came home, right? And things that happened. What would you have wanted from that situation? And not as like a way to like make you go back and like, I don't want you to feel bad about it, but for people going forward when they have people come home, like what would be your suggestion for people to, how should they approach that type of encounter and like those relationships again post somebody being, away at war in a situation that they'll never really understand for themselves?
See, and that's where it becomes difficult, because everyone that comes back changes in their own way, in the same but in their own way. Even if you don't deploy, you're totally institutionalized. You're in a totally different culture and everything like that. And I think the harder thing is like some guys feed into that you're a hero. They won't say themselves that they're a hero, but they're put in this position where it's just like you're better than me already. Like people are saying, like in a sense, like building that whole persona. Like I've actually read articles where it's like, don't call people heroes because it isolates them and it makes them already unrelatable to everyone else. Um, and that was definitely the harder thing. Like I felt like literally like I was this statue, and that people would come and visit and want to hear the stories and all these things. And then as they started to hear the stories more often and all this stuff, it became more about them wanting to hear things than wanting to hear me, and wanting to get those hard experiences, because everyone wants to hear the cool story about jumping out of planes and being in combat and all these things. But when all of the stuff that comes along with it, all of like the hardship, the guilt, that's when people get turned off, because it's no longer exciting. It's no longer this big deal. Like the spotlight is fading.
Mhm.
You
There's no
know,
glory there, right? That's not where we're kind of designed. Like we're not encouraged to see the glory in that part,
right,
Right.
right? From our culture standpoint.
right. And it's like it is a weakness that like people see it as. It's like the moment that I really started to struggle, like where I really started to have problems, more and more people stepped away.
Yeah.
Because they didn't know how to be there for me, but I also learned down the road that they didn't know how to be there for themselves. Like I matured very quickly, very quickly. It's once I came home, and I've heard so many people that I've, been in the military with, they're just like, I feel like I'm 5, 10 years older than the rest of the people that are my age. Like we've seen the world in a very different way and learned all these different lessons, and it's extremely hard to relate to those experiences, but how we react to stressful experiences and like take away what really caused it and the aftermath of what a stressful, traumatic, um, everything that ties into what they are right now from before they even left. Because a lot of guys run to the military to get away from their situations, and it doesn't necessarily go away. It just kind of gets exacerbated. So like it's like it's strange, but it's taking the combat element out of it, that whole pedestal hero picture, because then you are intimidated to go and you are afraid, in a sense to, go to this glorified person and just be like, well, these are my problems and stuff
I
like
was just
that.
about to say that.
Yeah.
Like you almost cut yourself off when you hear about all those experiences that you can't complain about what's going on in your life. You can't, because whatever is going on with you is not as extreme as what you think is going on with him. Even though he's a regular human, he has other things going on other than what happened in combat. Like he still had other things that happened that are relatable. I think that's where it's like you don't look at him anymore as relatable. When people ask him about all these stories and everything, it cuts them off from actually getting to know who he is.
Right. And people belittle, like, this is the one thing when I really started going through therapy and where I started to realize my disconnect from people. It's just like, just because I went through something that might seem harder to you doesn't mean that we didn't feel the same way about something that you went through. Like your parents getting divorced and, a trauma that I faced, you shouldn't be comparing them. You can never actually live in someone's shoes and feel the emotional trauma that they're going through. And I'm not going to sit there and compare being in combat to being in a car accident. They still are living with those same effects. The severity really depends on how the person is interpreting and how they're able to process it. So like, because I met a lot of people on inpatient and in outpatient that had been through things that I first looked at like, okay, like my buddy lost both of his legs, and you went through this traumatic experience 10 years ago. That doesn't seem like anything. But over that 10-year period of not facing it, it becomes something as strong, or it becomes something more than what it originally was. So it's that's where I think the biggest thing that people need to start realizing is that comparing traumas and everything like that, it doesn't help anything. It isolates people from one another and being able to relate. So
Comparison, that's a good word. Because as you guys are talking about it, what Michelle said, right? That lack of feeling like you can relate and kind of feeling, oh geez, sorry,
cats everywhere.
like, like you're in a situation where, and I think that's why it was better. It would have been better if we could have just been like us hanging out like we normally had been prior, instead of being in that situation, because I think the situation is what made it feel uncomfortable. Like you're saying, right? Like watching everybody kind of do that to you, and I was like, all right, maybe I shouldn't do anything. And that's a part of the culture that we have to change. Okay, so I have lots of follow-up questions, and I'm starting to write things down so that I can circle back. And then I want to ask Michelle a specific question too. So, Dan, you brought up the idea of like the vulnerability, and Marie and I talk about vulnerability a lot because that's a big part of, being in that process, like being in your own personal journey. And once you have the awareness, you have to be willing to step into that vulnerability. And I think that it's total bullshit that the thing that is the most human about going away and experiencing combat isn't the fighting, isn't the skill set. It's the fact that you're experiencing all of that vulnerability, right? On like a physical level, putting yourself in that situation, but then like having to experience all the things that you experienced in your mental health afterwards. That's extremely vulnerable, right? You willingly do that. And for someone like you willingly put yourself in this position to go do that. And it's total BS that that's something that you, like you said, you feel like that's the thing that people start to feel uncomfortable with, or they start to turn away from, is that's not what they want to see, right? And that's I think the frustrating part about the way that we treat veterans or anybody that goes into war, is they come back and we stop caring about them. We only seem to care about them when they're gone, and then it's like, well, we want to do the best for you when you're gone, but that's not when we really have the chance to do something. It's when you come back. So I think that whole system is a little interesting. And I want to touch on the exacerbating, but I really want to ask Michelle a question first. Okay, I want to know your perspective of all of this, and I want to know how you managed it, and like what brought you guys together and made you realize that you wanted to like do life together going forward after this.
Oh man. Wow. No, that's like a loaded question. No, it's fine.
Big. Like, I'm so curious. Like, you guys have the potential to give other people hope.
Yeah. No, I mean, I don't know. I feel like when I first got into it, I didn't know what I was getting myself into. Let's just put it that way. I didn't know, so it was new to me. And I feel like something new always makes or breaks a person. Like, you either get scared and don't want to deal with it, or you think it's fine and you're gonna learn as you go. And I think I just learned as I went. And I did see the same thing that you saw, Brittany, like the way people treated him and everything. And I don't know, at the end of those party like nights, it would be us two just hanging out, usually cleaning up, and I don't think we ever talked about you being in combat. Like, there were very, very rare conversations where I would ask, like, those questions that other people were asking throughout the night, or that he would see these people in places, like we'd go to the mall or whatever, and people would stop him and that's what they ask him. I'm like, he's still a person. Ask him how he's doing instead of, oh, how's the army, or how's this and that. Like, he came up for the weekends to see his family, to get away from that in a way. So I just felt like there was no need to ever talk about it. And I also visited him on base. So we were always around your friends and everything. You guys would talk, but I would never ask them about their experiences. And I think learning that and seeing the different sides of it, I don't know, he was still human. At the end of it, he was human. And I think that was every day I would have to remind myself, like, the military is not just who he is. That's it. Like, he had a whole life before the military. He has a whole life after that he can make and do whatever he wants with it. And I mean, I saw what it did to him, and I mean, there were breaking points here and there. I mean, I wouldn't say that I was the nicest sometimes when it came out, when we had our arguments here and there. I mean, just like anybody, I gave him hope in the way of like being harsh, saying like, you can do this, you got it. Like, there are thousands of soldiers, and I know that they feel lost, but like, be that one that pushes that extra mile. Like, I am here with you, and I will go through it with you. And I learned not only a lot about him, but I learned a lot about myself. I learned that, it's not a bad thing to express about your anxiety. I come from a family of avoiders too. We don't talk about anything. It's like, sweep it under the rug, get over it. And harsh, almost immigrant mentality of, a lot of stuff happened in our families, generations past, like, whatever, get over it, we're fine, just keep going. And I think I learned a lot through him too, that it's okay to feel, it's okay to talk about feelings, it's okay to talk about other things than what I think we are meant, like what people put on you, like how people put on him, that he's just a soldier. He's not just a soldier. He's not just the military. He is still a person. So
yeah, and I mean, the big thing too is that I think that's what, especially in the beginning, what made it keep going, because I mean, like, it was very easy for me to talk to girls when I got back. It was, and like, I'm not trying to like.
I love Michelle's just head nodding to this. I'm a big fan.
Well, because we've had these talks.
Yeah, we've had these talks, because I told him, I was like, in the beginning of it, I told him, I was like, I hope you know that everyone's telling me like to be careful of you, because you talk to everyone, you this, that, and the other. And I think that also got to him. Like, he almost wanted to be like, well, I'm gonna prove everybody wrong if that's what everybody's saying. So
because it was very easy, because like what we're talking about as far as putting the person on a pedestal and
Yeah.
everything like that, it was very easy for me to, I guess, sway people.
Yeah.
And
You can use that to your
yeah,
advantage.
well, that's the
Well,
problem.
and it was also it was a lot. I mean, me and Robin were still in high school, so a
My
lot of
sister.
girls that
Just
were his sister. There was a lot of girls around him that were in high school, and again, being somebody that really didn't understand, okay, he's a soldier, great, and then everybody else, the girls that were around me, it's like, oh, he's a soldier though, like. Like that kind of thing, you know. And I'm like, all right.
Again, this is the part of American culture I'm like, I don't understand what's
I
happening.
don't. Right, me either. That's where I was just like,
Right,
okay, and
it's the thing that's been cultivated over. And see, I'm so the opposite, because I was like, oh God, I'm going the other way. Like, if you're a soldier, I'm going that way, because I had me in authority. Like, I was like not about it. So like, and not that Dan was ever this person. So I'm very interested to hear the other side of this. But it's very funny because he was never the person that had like would take anything, at least from what I ever saw of him in high school, right? With how great he was in track, with like how friendly he was, like you never use any of that as like an advantage to be like, look at me. And you know how I responded to all the boys in school who did all of that. Maria knows that too. So that's so okay. So I want to hear all about what the other side of this looks like, and I want to know. Side note, I also want to say I strongly believe that the universe brings us the people who will help us the most, like the people we need in life. So I think that Dan and like Michelle, I'm sure that you see this too, but I know Dan's life, right? I 100% believe that you being the person that you were, right? Being the person who is a first generation, not having connection to the culture, being the person who has so much of that perspective for all the things that you just said. You guys are together for a reason, right? Like you guys were gonna be together because there's nobody who didn't have the perspective that you had, that there would be a relationship still happening. So that's a beautiful thing to keep in mind also.
One of the things that I was told on deployment, because there was guys whose wives were sending them divorce papers. You know,
my God.
the girl, I mean, I don't want to mention her name, but the girl that I was with,
Cat.
the girl that I was with for almost 3.5 years broke up with me through a Facebook message in the middle of my deployment. So
some people.
So that even happened to me and everything like that. But you know, one of the guys that had deployed like 3 or 4 times already, he was just like, and this is when he met his wife. Was the people that you're able to connect with the most outside of the military and everything like that when you get back are the people that are going to be there. You know, like and he was like, that's when I met my wife, you know, the person that was there for all the ugly, you know, the person like that kind of stuff. And like we're talking about vulnerability, like she was there for that, you know, like I'm coming home from something where I've been vulnerable the whole time. I'm around the guys that I can be vulnerable about and talk about things that, you know, I didn't get to talk about with people that I've known for 20 years at that point, you know, like people that I grew up with around that I couldn't talk to about how I was legitimately feeling and being honest about. And it's kind of strange because she had all the parts of it. It was a little bit of the life before the aftermath, and then, you know, kind of, I don't know, everything in between. It was very she was kind of that middle ground between the guys that I had been there with and the people that I knew before. It was very it kind of just worked out that way, and it was very interesting because when we met, I had been stationed in Fort Bragg, which is in Fayetteville on the east side of North Carolina. When we had met, she actually was moving down to Charlotte, which was a few hours away from where I was stationed to go to school. And that's when we had been talking, and I was just like, oh, wow, okay, so then, you know, instead of having to drive 8 hours to New Jersey to see
all the
you,
time,
you know, it's only a few hours away. And it kind of just like started to work out more and more to where we were able to, I guess, see each other. And she was pretty straight out, which
yeah, well, no, because our story was kind of funny. Like, yeah, okay, so he came back from deployment, his 21st birthday. I made him cupcakes with his sister, so we had to pick him up from my house. So I was like, listen, I know we only know each other a couple minutes. Mind you, this is after all day of people telling me they're scared to approach him. I'm just like, all right, come on, dude. I got to get you cupcakes there at my house. My grandmother comes out, who only speaks Polish, is talking to him in Polish. I was like, oh, great. And then from there, I was dating somebody at the time. So then around like Christmas time, we broke up, and he swooped in. And honestly, and this is gonna sound funny, but we were each other's rebounds, basically.
Mhm.
Honestly, that's what we were. And after that, I mean, we talked for 2 months, and I'm somebody who I'm very straight. Like, you got to tell me. And I know at 17, it's a very like hard mentality of like, okay, what is this going to be? Because obviously from 17 to your 20s, it's supposed to be fun. You're supposed to be dating everything. I was just not that type of person. It's just like, okay, what is this? And I straight up asked him one day. I was like, so what is this going to be? What are we doing here?
I remember exactly where I was. I was at work, and I looked down at my phone, and I'm not like supposed to look at my phone when I'm in uniform, like walking wise, like that was the whole thing. And I stopped, and I was like, I looked at my friends. I was like, she's asking what this is gonna be, like, and I didn't have like an answer at first. Like, I really genuinely wasn't trying to get close to people that were
Yeah.
outside of that, because like the last time, all those times that I was close to anyone else, I was starting not to be able to relate to them. And I didn't really, like, had we not met, and I almost did it even though we had met and we were continuing the relationship, I was going to re-enlist. Like I was going to
And I was all
re-enlist.
for it.
And she was all for it. I was
Yeah.
going to go into basically be a trauma nurse and go to Texas, and we were going to move in together and start this whole other chapter and everything like
Which
that.
was like only it wasn't even a year into our relationship.
Yeah.
And we were like, I was just like, all right. I mean, it was something new. But the reason I think I asked you that, honestly, is because being in relationships prior and being hurt and everything, all these people were telling me who you were or who they thought you were. And it was mostly the girls that were around me. They were like, just watch out, like this, that, and the other. And
Which goes to say a lot about the fact that they didn't actually know who he was, because you were never that.
no,
No.
they
you
just
say that I'm confused. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm very
because
confused.
they only heard the girl side of the story
Of
of
course.
whoever I guess you were with at the time, so like they would come up to me and it's like, oh, just watch out, this, that, and the other. And I told myself, I'm just, like I said, straight. I was just like, I'm not going to go through hurt or anything, so let's figure this out. What is this? Because I'm not going to go through all of that. I'm not going to go through drama. If something happens behind closed doors, like, no, I'm not
And the
about it.
horse's mouth is the best thing to hear it from, right?
Yeah.
Well, and like that was honestly one of the biggest deals, like outside of the people that I had, gone overseas with, that was the only person being straight with me. Like, really and honestly, like that was in like on a regular basis that I had talked to and was like able to communicate with and be able to relate to on certain things, and that was familiar. Outside of, like I said, the friends that I had in the military, everyone else was glorifying me to be more than how I felt about myself, more than what other people could possibly really understand. And that was the big attraction. It was just like, okay, when I'm with you and I'm home, I could separate myself, which is what other people aren't letting me do, from those experiences, like big time. I don't, even my parents, like, and a lot of that, it's making that about themselves. Like, I realized really quick that people were making this about themselves. Like, this is how I felt about you being gone. And like, I was even made to feel guilty by some family members because it was very strange. Because I had lost a sibling. So, the fact of me going off and risking my life was just like, well, that's kind of selfish, in its own sense. It was very, very strange position to be in. Like, I didn't feel like I belonged at home. Like, it was I was glorified by them, but then I was kind of looked at in that way too. And like, I could get away with murder with everyone. I also didn't like that. Like, there was no limit to what I could get away with, what I could say to anyone, what I can literally anything.
Like, your parents could never say, like, they heard me tell him no for the first time, which I mean, I can tell him no. They're like, you're telling Daniel no. I'm like, Yeah, I'm telling Daniel that he doesn't get a pass, like, for thing. I don't even remember what the thing was, but they looked at me like, oh, okay. Like, and I think that was also the other thing too, is you came into my family and they didn't treat him any different, that he was okay, like, okay, you're a soldier, but you're still a person. So he sat down for family dinners. We got to talk and laugh, and he didn't talk about, I don't think, anything as far as deployment, maybe a little bit of like army life, like the barracks life, but that's about it.
Yeah, and that was another thing that kind of just evolved. I was getting closer in being able to not associate my whole life about being in the military with family, unlike my own, which was it was kind of scary, like because I was being vulnerable in a different way. I wasn't being forced to be vulnerable, which was refreshing. It was very different, and like we everyone goes through their bumps. I went through not being able to relate to being okay with not being able to relate. Um, it was different because
it was different culture.
Well, and I am Polish, but I wasn't raised that way outside of going to church. But like we didn't have traditions. We really didn't sit down for family dinners outside of like Thanksgiving and Christmas. Like, it was basically an entirely different thing for me. It's kind of what I needed.
But my family also calls each other out too. Like we're very, very upfront with each other. We don't get like the way or at least the way I was taught is like, if my family's going to say something, it's that they're saying it because they love me. Like even though it may upset me, or I may get like that teenager rage where I'm like, well, that's not fair. Don't say that about this, that, and the other. They're looking out for me because no one else is going to say that to me. I'm going to just go on. If like none of my friends would say that. I know now, especially at 25, I am grateful for my mother saying the things that she said, even though I was mad maybe prior. It's the same thing that happened with him when you got out of the army. They were very real with him,
and I wasn't used to that because my entire family is very passive aggressive. They kind of sweep their problems under the rug. There's a lot of things, like when my sister passed away, I was probably like 5 years old, but I knew what PTSD was growing up my entire life. And when I started to find out things about what that really entails, even if it wasn't like something that I was dealing with personally, it's just like, well, this is the definition of PTSD. This is the definition of like why people worry and all this stuff. And I was like, mom, dad, sister, like I was able to like pinpoint all these things.
Do that? It's so fun.
I was just like,
every bubble you possibly had.
Fun is a word, sure.
Yeah, fun is a word, a big eye-opening experience, because like I used to get mad at my parents, especially my father, for so many things, and that was his daughter from his first marriage. Like my step siblings, it wasn't any different than me and my siblings. I never called them my step siblings, but like it was his daughter, and I used to blame him for how he acted, his outbursts, all these things, and like understanding that for myself, like what was going on through me, I got a big realization of who my parents really were and what they were really dealing with. And I see it.
After a bystander basically told you, it's not that bad what your siblings are saying. I literally, because I lived with his parents, and all this anger that he had towards them, and then visiting his siblings here and there for dinners or events or whatever, and hearing what they had to say, I was like, you just are repeating what your siblings are. This is not exactly how you feel. Like, I'm not telling you how to feel, but just from being the bystander in this situation, like not being involved, you don't even know who your parents are because of how much you were influenced at such a young age, like by these thoughts and sayings from your siblings that you don't even know.
Because there's a 19-year difference between the youngest and the oldest in our family. So their life with my parents is completely different than mine and my younger sister's life with my parents, entirely different. And you throw all of that trauma and all of the things that happened, between all of us and everything like that, not dealing with that, then going to the military and deploying right away and kind of being not able to associate with anyone, and then all of these things that make it even more isolating from, not everyone's lost a sibling, not everyone has, had sexual abuse in their life, not everyone has wanted to commit suicide, and then no one really know about it. Like that was my junior year. Um, and then very few people through combat, and then when you put all of that together, it's like I can't associate with anyone. I know no one's going to understand me in that way, and having to find that out for myself took years, and I hurt a lot of people, and not even intentionally. Like that, I think that was the harder thing because I felt like I was constantly hurting her. With
Yeah.
like I didn't feel like me being in her life was being helpful. I was holding her back because I couldn't help myself.
Yeah, he would legitimately just tell me to go. Like he didn't know what to do basically on his end. Like I'm holding you back. I'm not good enough kind of perspective on things. And I think holding out and being that person that's like, I'm not going anywhere. Sorry, sweetheart. Like this is a team effort. So, and I mean, when it came to your friends and everything too, I mean, I got Mama Bear defensive because I saw what they were doing. I mean, I saw it from the beginning, and then seeing him open up about these hard things. Yes, it's hard to understand. I had to sit there and evaluate it myself. I mean, when he told me about the sexual abuse, it was 1 o'clock in the morning. He's like, I have to tell you something. He tells me and goes to sleep because that's the first time he's ever said anything about it. And I'm here, got no sleep, and I don't even know how to feel because I've never had anyone say anything like that to me.
Dropping bombs.
Yeah.
Metaphorically.
So, and from that point on, I'm just like, all right, well, I'm not somebody who's going to be explosive about it. I need to think, evaluate, process. And I think that's all it was the whole time, is just evaluating, processing, resolving every single situation that came up. So
I think that's
I give you guys so much credit for that's hard on both of you.
Yeah. It's funny how trauma works. Like this is the whole
Maria
thing, right?
and I
like,
talk about trauma constantly because we are both trauma people.
More power to you, Michelle. Like I mean, and of course Dan, you do, obviously. Like but to be the person like next to someone going through everything, like dude, more power to you.
Yeah, it was
definitely,
it was a lot.
Yeah, it was a lot on both ends.
Yeah.
It was honestly a lot of hard things to figure out because like older generations, like they wouldn't, and when I was talking to people and kind of coming out about what happened to me as a child, like there was people that were older that like even my boss at one time, he was like, I can't believe you just told me that.
Yeah.
I am 40 something years old and I've never said a word about what happened to me. And here you are in your early 20s talking about this. And then, kind of like that's when people really started to separate because, they
didn't
just
know how to deal with it. I think, right? Like they just had no idea.
Them. Yeah.
It
scared them. It scared them away. And I think that was it was a big thing. That's where I became very defensive because people put him up on that pedestal and glorified him and were there for him and wanted him to come out drinking and everything. And when he expressed, well, I don't want to go out drinking because it makes me feel X, Y, and Z. That's when they started to shy away. I'm just like, you don't get to pick and choose when you want to be a friend. Like you're there.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and I think also when it comes to older, like you were saying about older generation, me and your mom grew very close when you told them about all of that. Like I can't even count on my hands how many hours I think I sat and talked with her because it was new to her too. Like if she didn't know, but she even said like if anything like that ever happened and or a different situation, she never was raised to say anything. It probably would have, honestly, it would have died with her, like how most of our parents are taught. So,
which is unfortunate.
Yeah, it's very unfortunate.
And like
That's like one of the biggest things that people regret, right? I wish I never said what I wanted to say.
Yeah.
Right.
Right,
And like
right.
I think the scariest part, because it was already happening with the combat and people talking to me about it and influencing me big time to go drinking, partying, talk about it, drinking, partying, talk about it, is that like when I started to bring up other stuff that like was making all of that worse, that didn't have to relate to the combat experience and everything like that, it was just like, and I even like, it almost like shuts off when I start talking about it. Like it's once I started to get to like that deeper stuff, it reinvigorated the trauma. Like you block things out to not remember. Your brain does that naturally. It literally stops you from remembering certain things to not damage you. And like, like when I started talking about it more, things just started to open up. Like, okay, maybe this is why I acted the way I did, because there's like this kind of like, they're called chai boys. I might have talked about it a little bit last time, but it's basically culturally accepted in parts of the Middle East and like even I think in Southeast Asia, I think. But there's like little boys are seen for pleasure, and women are for reproduction. So these little chai boys, they would serve the men chai tea, and then they would kind of have their way with them. And I saw that on deployment, and that just like not the act of it, but I saw it. I knew it was happening, and then someone gave me that nickname.
Oh,
I was
no.
right. So like,
No.
I didn't know why it was hurting me so much. Like I totally shut down. I felt like I didn't want to be alive anymore in the middle of all this. I had just met all of these guys and I'm deployed with them in this place. And like when I got back, like that started to evolve into more. And like I just had to say it. Like I couldn't get married having these like things that I couldn't talk about. Like had I not talked about this, I don't think that we would be together, because it just stopped me from being able to communicate things, because I had this secret. I had this thing that I was constantly holding back.
Even before you got help, that same question that I asked before we started dating was the same question I asked you before you got help, because I was at a point where I didn't know what to do anymore. Like I've given my whole self and a little bit more, and I think that was a big eye opener for you yourself. I think that
because someone was challenging the thoughts that I had, challenging, all of these different aspects that no one really questioned before. They were just like I was saying, like, well, that's expected. Like, of course like even when I was talking to people that were older that had experienced like my sister passing away and everything like that, they were just like, they isolated my family because they couldn't imagine, or they would assume, this is how they feel. So,
or they want to be left alone,
or they want to be left alone,
stuff
or
like
and then when people can't relate to those situations, they start to assume like, and when people talk about it, they start to assume like, okay, well, because I can't understand it, I assume that this is how you feel. Like PTSD, combat, that's what it is. Like feeling suicidal, all these things, well, that's trauma based, abuse, whatever. People automatically associate it if they don't understand it or they don't want to understand it.
Yeah.
Like and when people do want to understand it, they keep pressing. They keep asking those questions, challenging those thoughts that people have about themselves and like all of that. So it's a constant thing that doesn't end, and I think the biggest thing for people to last in relationships is like, I guess, is wanting to keep communicating with your partner and wanting to constantly better yourself. It's like you almost have to be selfish for like to be able to work on yourself so that you can be not only better for you but better for the person you care about.
I think that was the biggest thing that I learned in all of it. Like I could be there Yes, but I needed to change as well too, because there were things that I had to deal with, like especially a couple months ago when I started coaching, I guess you would say, like I did the health and fitness. That was a lot of going through because I mean I was as skinny as I was, and a lot of people, like I said, a lot of people made me believe to just be grateful for the way I look, even though, and it goes similar to what you just said, they didn't know what was going on the inside. I didn't want to eat or sleep or anything because I was dealing with a lot of what I guess happened already because you were at a good place and then I was still processing everything that just happened. And now that we're good, everything like the storm was calm. It was hard, and it was even hard when we got here to North Carolina to because we always were on defense, like protecting our peace, because that's something we established together. Like we're not going to let anyone in our bubble that is disrupting that kind of And coming here, I think it took like 2-3 months to get that defense level down because not everyone's out to get you. Like we got into an environment that's not the case where we have to keep looking over our shoulder if somebody's doing something shady or having a different motive, like a different agenda with knowing us or being with us or anything like that.
Like kind of using our problems against us to get what they want.
Yeah.
Or to feel a certain way. And you know, like, and that's the kind of crappy part is that when you start to understand trauma and all of that stuff, it's like and this is what I realized with my family, a big realization, they're not trying to manipulate you in a way that they realize. They're trying to manipulate the situation so that they can keep surviving.
Yeah, it's really, I was gonna say it's their survival. Like they're coping with the way that they've always coped, not understanding that the way that they cope. Because I can also speak to the older generation of my family. Not like they don't understand that it's also affecting other people. That's just generational trauma. That's just I feel like Brittany and I talk about this all the time. And Brittany, are you muted?
I think so.
Turn mic not working. Yeah.
Oh.
Okay. All right.
No.
Yeah, I can hear you now.
My mic's my computer's dying, and I don't know where my computer charger is. But yes, Maria and I talk about this, the generational issues. But I had told Dan this the last time we spoke, Michelle. I think that the greatest thing that you guys did for yourselves was get out of Jersey.
Yeah.
Agreed.
100%.
It's a lot of the things that you're talking about that you bring up that weren't like the things that aren't good for you, you have to get away from. And I know so many people that have, gotten really far, by whatever means, away from the things that weren't good for them. And they get so much pushback about that. Like, why did you abandon this? Why did you leave here? Oh, you're so blah, blah, blah. And that's not the point, right? Like these people aren't leaving because it's super painful to do that, right? To walk away.
Oh, yeah.
You identify with everything that makes you maybe like feel like it's you, even if it hurts. But when you're at a point where it's like, I'm trying to establish coping mechanisms. I'm trying to establish boundaries, and that's not being met evenly, and you're still getting you're still getting hurt, like it's still doing damage to you, then you have to separate yourself. And the fact that you guys were willing to take that step together is a beautiful thing. And I think it should be celebrated. And I'm like so happy that you can just be happy, right? Like that, all that matters. Everybody else can suck it.
All that matters in life. For
sure. Well, and I mean, a lot of people, and I mean, I did it for so long, and didn't even realize you become so complacent in your hardships and, your shortcomings and your trauma and everything like that, that stepping outside of that is what maybe caused it in the first place, but you become so complacent and so it becomes so familiar that stepping outside of that is terrifying. Like
no one likes change. No one likes a difference.
Yeah,
right. Because staying in there, and I say this from my experience, and it's funny the stuff that you talk about in communicating with Dan, like my Dan and I have a lot of the same stuff with that. Like the more you sit in that, that's where that huge monster starts to build up, where you feel like you're not good enough, right? That's the end all be all of what all of this does to us. Because once we start to separate, and there's so many, like forms of separation, those levels of separation. Once you hit a certain point and you feel like you can't come back from it because you're in that isolated place, that's where you start to believe the story that you're telling yourself, or believe all the millions of negative things that you've heard that sit up there, that you're not good enough to go back, right? Or maybe
Oh
not.
yeah, the self-doubts and negative talk. Yeah.
And it's the worst. So whatever way, and this is for anybody who listens to this, whatever journey you have to take to help yourself find how you get out of that, wherever that sends you, however far away you might need to be from people that are part of who you were, that's okay. It's about
Oh my God. I just started choking. It's worth it. It was what I was going to say. And then my body was just rejecting that idea, apparently.
Because if we look at, like depression, if we look at all the things that you guys brought up before, right? Nutrition and all that stuff. And I'm a very big believer in like the way that we hold on to energies and how that works with your chakras, and like the energies that reside in our bodies. When we take that bad crap and we hold on to it as a person who's had previous digestive issues, like that was the reason why I had all of that. I was holding on to all of that past, and then it was literally sitting in my gut, right? And was like manifesting into this terrible crap in my system. And I couldn't get over it until I literally got over it, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
I forward and stopped looking at the stuff in the past. And relationships with like things that you guys have brought up, right? Relationships with family, relationships with friends, relationships with people who become a really big part of who we are as we develop our identity when we're younger, right? The people who strongly influence that identity that we develop, those are the people who hold the key, right? So either we take a hold of that key and make the decisions that we want to make, or like you're saying, Dan, like you sit in it.
Mhm.
And sitting in it fucking sucks.
Yes.
And it's a lot scarier, right? It requires a lot more vulnerability. It's a hell of a lot scarier to have to go through it. But the beautiful thing about it is that you guys have each other, right? And you've spoken to this, and I agree with you guys 100%. It's not about making the other person take on your crap. It's about you carrying your crap, but there's somebody walking next to you carrying their own crap.
Mm-hmm.
And you're all walking together.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Sorry. But I want to round this up. Do you guys have anything else? Just because my computer's going to die. We could sit here for forever, but I straight up don't know what I do with my computer charger. Is there anything else that you guys want to share? Any other tidbits? Any other like maybe
Life lessons,
like tips for people?
tips, tricks.
Don't cut yourself off from growing. I think all of us are taught to think like that we have a cutoff line. Once you're done with school, once you have a job, once you have a house, you're done growing. Keep growing. Grow every day. Honestly. Be a better you every day.
And like I have this book, it's like about habits and everything like that, and they talk about the British cycling team for like the Olympics and everything like that. And the reason that they hadn't won any gold medals or anything like that for so long, once in the last 80 years, they started making little changes, one change a day, from their uniforms to, like just a different type of training, just this one little percent every single day.
Mm-hmm.
And then they won 4 years in a row. And they started like 4 seasons in a row or something along those lines, but they became the best cycling team of the last 20 years, of the last century.
Being 1% better.
1% better every single day. So do that.
Yeah, do that. Change is worth it. Growing is worth it. All of it's worth it.
You brought up the 1%. You brought up the habits, right? I'm a whole big on believer that like your habits are who you are. And if you remember what book that is, Dan, we'll definitely share it in our notes. But one of the amazing books that I read that talks about that like 1% change. That's on my book list.
It's really good.
The awesome books that I read that talks about how like your habits and the things that you choose to do on a daily basis compound into like trajectory changes. It's called The Compound Effect by Darren Hardy. It talks about it in terms of like finances and personal habits and a lot of good things that we should have learned in school that we didn't. But it gives really good perspective on seeing that long-term difference like you brought up. So tune into both those books. So Atomic Habits and The Compound Effect. We'll put them in the notes. Maria will do what Brittany does. But thank you guys. We're definitely going to bring you, Maria and I want to have like topic chats going on in the future. And we definitely want to bring you back in, especially Michelle. We didn't really get to talk too much about all of your health coach stuff because we want to talk about that. But when we do like chats and tips and all of that. Love to be able to bring both of you back. Thank you
Yeah.
so much for joining us. Like,
Yeah, thank you guys.
Thank
Well,
you for
we
having
appreciate
us.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. We appreciate both your friendships with us now. Like, this is incredible. This is a safe space, obviously.
Yeah.
we know that this is going to help people. This is going to help, right? Our goal in this show is to help people realize that they're not alone. And this is a huge part, like the topic of this conversation was like the ways that we experience isolation, right?
Yeah.
And how we can overcome that in relationships, whether it's someone like we want like a romantic relationship, a lifelong partner, or like friends and family that we get to choose whether we want to interact with. So thank you guys so much for sharing your story. We appreciate it so much.
Thank you.
All right, Maria, do you want to wrap it
You
up?
sign off. I don't sign off on this on this show.
Thank you everybody for listening to the Be More podcast episode today. I hope you go back and I hope you listen to this like 3-4 more times because there's so many really good little golden nuggets that are dropped. And thank you again to Daniel and Michelle. And we will talk to you guys on the next episode.
Bye, guys. Thank you.